On Tuesday, July 2nd, almost a year to the date when Londonderry experienced some of the worst flooding that resulted from the rainfall of July 9th and 10th of last year, U.S. Senator Peter Welch and Congresswoman Becca Balint came to the New American Grill in the Mountain Marketplace in Londonderry to hear from local residents about how the recovery has been going. Did the help they received from FEMA and other federal agencies meet their needs? What went well? What could have been done better? Over the course of the nearly 45-minute meeting with a crowd of about 50 residents from Londonderry and neighboring communities who were also impacted by the flooding, Senator Welch and Congresswoman Balint heard a lot and answered several questions. The following is a recording of the entire meeting, along with brief interviews with both of them afterwards.
Thank you all so much for being here. Senator and Congresswoman, really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you about what needs to improve, what may have gone well or not, and just have an open conversation about the events over the last year. So I'm not going to take any more time. If you do have any questions, though, about specific issues, my name is David Scher, State Director for Congresswoman Balint. Senator has staff here as well. We're all happy to talk with you, but I know you're really here to talk with them. So I will turn it over to you, Becca.
Sir?
It's good to be with you.
Good to be with you.
I'll defer to our Congresswoman.
Well, thank you so
My
much.
great colleague in Washington.
You know, we see each other more in Vermont than we do in D.C. because the two houses, although they're right next to each other.
She's dealing with Marjorie Taylor Greeno.
That's right. Well, look, what a wonderful thing it is to be in Vermont on such a beautiful day and to see people. I know many of you from this immediate area, but also people coming from other towns to come and meet with us. It's incredibly important to us not just to have an opportunity to hear directly from you about what is working in terms of recovery. We're a year out from the flooding. I know that many people want to talk about that, how FEMA worked well, how it did not work well, how municipalities are still struggling to get the resources that they need to get us back on track. How do we plan for the future to make sure that we are more resilient? We know these kinds of storms are going to continue to happen again. So it's very important for us to hear directly from people so that when I'm in communication either with the administration or with specific people, whether it's at HUD or at FEMA, I can say, look, I was in this town talking to this person about this issue. This is what's really happening. And so we have to be able to translate it so we can actually do our jobs better. And when we do our jobs better, then the money gets deployed more quickly to the places that need it. And so that is the top line. We really want to hear about how to do these get through these emergencies better and rebuild more quickly in the future. I know there are a whole lot of other things that folks want to tell us this morning, so I want to make sure I keep my remarks brief so that we can hear more from you. And I couldn't be more happy to serve alongside Senator Welch. He and Bernie and I actually are working really well together. Our teams are working well together, and they have made it a smooth transition for me going from state legislature into Congress. And thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Becca, thank you so much and for the tremendous work you've been doing. You know, it was so amazing to be down here right after the flood and to just see the devastation and determination at the same time.
Speak up, please.
Thank you. It was so wonderful to be here after the flood. Not wonderful to see what was going on, but to see the determination to proceed. And here we are in this beautiful location. It's now in its 20th year, undeterred by what happened. And you know, a couple of times people ask me, what have you seen? And one, in the immediate aftermath, people just picking themselves up and getting together and doing what had to be done. Number two, neighbors helping one another. And local governments, we've got the chair of the select board here, just responding, calling up whoever they knew with a pickup or a backhoe or whatever else would be helpful. And you know, in Washington, a lot of people would start asking me and Becca, how's Vermont doing? And this would be months into it. And I always had some trouble answering that question because Vermont moved on, a lot of Vermonters. But if it was your home or your business or your farm that one was affected, then really the nightmare continued. And all of that collective energy that comes in the moment of the trauma right after the event, where you have that spirit of solidarity and community helping everyone, that starts to dissipate. Not that people don't care, but then that homeowner or that business owner has to deal with the red tape and the complexities of FEMA. They have to deal with talking to one FEMA person who interprets the rules one way and then another FEMA person who interprets it the other way. And then our local select boards, who you've elected and who are totally grounded in the community and have a lot of responsibility over some of the infrastructure improvements that have to be made, have to deal with that same thing. So my sense about what we have to do going forward, because these things are going to happen again, is number one, resiliency has to be included in everything we do, not just the FEMA response, but we've got to take into account in all our governmental programs the reality of the way weather behavior is now. That's number one. Number two, FEMA, in my experience, has done a pretty good job in the immediate aftermath, coming in and getting food, getting shelter, getting some aid to people. But the long-term reconstruction, if you want to call it, I think we have to have a model that takes the money and the responsibility and pushes it out of Washington and into Londonderry, into Ludlow, into Weston. Because my experience in this event, but also going back to Irene, is that the local folks know what the local folks need, right? So we have to have accountability if the money's going to come here. But I have a view that the more there is local control and implementation, the more successful and more efficient we are going to be in the recovery. So those are my thoughts that I just wanted to offer for the start. So Becca and I are really, really happy to be here, and we want to hear from you and go back to Washington and do all we can to make this work better.
So if I could, I know that there are a lot of people that would like to talk about issues related to politics and to the Supreme Court and those things, and those are also important to us. If we could start with talking about the flood recovery, because I know if we get down on that path, we may only talk about that, and we do want to make sure that we are learning directly from you what Londonderry, South Londonderry, West, what do these areas need to get back to where we were before, and so if we could start there, your experiences either in recovery, with FEMA, what worked, what didn't, what are the frustrations, all of you who are in local government here, if we could start there, and then I'm very happy to open it up to other topics as well. Yes, and if you could just say your name and project.
Hi, I'm Katie Johnson-Atlin. I'm on the select board in Newfane. One of the biggest problems that we face is being a small town with a very finite amount of tax money that we have. We are writing grants, federal grants, for lots of things, not just FEMA, but lots of things to afford anything, because we just don't have the population to tax. And the problem with the federal grants is that there is so much red tape to get to the money that it's doubling the cost of basic construction, the hoops and the timelines that it takes to get these things done is 5 years, 6 years sometimes,
yeah,
because of the incredibly fussy regulations that are the federal level. But it's just us little tiny towns talking to the feds. We don't have county government to help us do this stuff. If there is anything that you can do in Washington to streamline it a little bit, give us a chance to actually have nice things, that would be great.
And so,
thank you.
just to reflect back, so I hear talking about cutting red tape, regulations, also capacity at the local level. You don't necessarily have, well, we know you don't. You have the capacity of a big city to be able to have
employees.
Exactly.
Right? trying to do all this stuff.
And that is something that I mentioned to Senator Markey when they were designing the Inflation Reduction Act and all of the money that was available through that for building green. And I said, it doesn't do a lot of good for us in smaller towns if we don't have the capacity to actually pull down that money. And I know that's something that the senator cares about a lot as well. So that's really helpful.
And we have heard that, and it stands to reason that's the case. You don't have the technical resources because you don't hire people to be on staff for the next flood we get in 5 years, right? So we've got some legislation that would provide technical assistance resources to smaller communities in situations like this. But I also think the red tape issue goes to what I was saying earlier. We've got to push down that authority and decision-making capacity to you, because you know what you need about a town road bridge that's out in the middle of your community, just like our select board chair does here. Thank you.
I could speak for probably this whole time, but I'll try to be brief. Resources, as she said, is a big issue for us. I mean, during the flood, I wore every hat there was. I was rescue, road crew, select board. I did it all. And you had to. We don't have the resources. Londonderry was lucky enough to hire Bill Kearns. He's a former FEMA employee to do all our paperwork. Without him, we wouldn't have any money today. I don't think we'd have a dime probably. We're almost $500,000 from FEMA now. There's a lot of towns out here that haven't gotten anything, or barely anything.
But that's that technical assistance you have.
Yeah.
That you didn't have.
Yeah. And without that, I mean, I don't know how these other towns are doing it.
Right. But you said it's getting a little better for you right now?
Once they changed out the FEMA staff, probably what was that, 2-3 months ago?
Yep, got that.
Before that, we weren't getting anywhere. There was no progress, it was just fighting. Once they brought in new people, everything has gone great since then.
That's great. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
And can I ask a follow-up? Was it a situation where one person was saying one thing and somebody else was saying another? Okay. And we have heard that in other communities, and it's obviously, I need to tell you, that's a real problem.
And from the state perspective, not so much federal, the codes and standards has been a real problem. Trying to determine whether or not this culvert needs to be upsized. That's been an uphill battle this whole time.
It's all guesswork.
It's all what?
Guesswork. Is it gonna be big enough for the next time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're trying to get FEMA just to agree that, and the state, that these are the codes and standards. You have to upgrade to a box culvert, 18-foot box culvert. 6-foot culvert's not gonna do it anymore. And trying to get the go-ahead to do that has been like pulling teeth.
No, that we can't allow that to continue.
Martha Dale, Vice Chair with Tom on the Londonderry Select Board. Reiterate everything Tom said. I think we need a better set of data to work with. I will tell you that the 211 system was useless for us as community volunteers to figure out where the need was. So everything is driven by data. We need to figure out a better way to use either federal or state information that then gets to us on the ground quickly. I will also say that our local nonprofits sprung into action in a beautiful way. Neighborhood Connections couldn't have been better. They hosted our MARC, which was that collection of resources, and it was just a wonderful scene to see people coming in and going out and meeting with all kinds of agencies in one place. And then the last point, again, about TA or technical assistance, navigators. We do it in healthcare all the time, right? So give us that expertise to walk us through, because we are lightweights when it comes to planning, and Londonderry's planning is, trying to figure out what to do next. We don't have that forward look, and I think something like a navigator might work.
Follow-up, when
Yeah.
you say 211 was useless, can you just break that down for me a little
So
bit more so
the
I understand?
requirement was for people to first call in their need to 211, and then 211 would then broker that, I think, onto some, either to FEMA or a state agency. The problem was, when it turned out, when you asked for a map of where the 211 calls were coming from, it was half or less than a large percent of our town as to where the need really showed up. People didn't know to call it, or it was useless data
Right,
in
so
terms of
that
figuring out concentrations of need.
So the people who, if you called more from a particular area, that would show up as a,
Like
as
it would
hot
highlight
spot.
a hot spot.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
Yeah. So, thank you, yeah.
My name's Lori Cruz, and I'm the minister of the Second Congregational Church, which is just right around the corner. And I'm not a municipality, I'm a local entity, so I don't know if you want to hear from towns
We
first.
want to hear from everybody.
Okay, so we're working with FEMA, and just to give you not a municipality experience, but a local nonprofit experience, the bar keeps changing, the goals keep changing,
Right.
and specifically around volunteer hours, we were told would count. And we spent some time putting that together because we didn't know to keep track of it, and they were gracious to let us.
Because you're in the middle of an emergency.
Right. And then about a week ago, oops, volunteer hours don't count. What would have counted would have been the hours I put in as a paid employee, which we didn't bother to keep track of because I was getting paid. So that is, and now we're a year or at least 10 months into FEMA. We all of a sudden, out of the blue, heard from a historical preservation person. The church is not on the National Register of Historical Places. They needed a turnaround of information in 2 working days, which we were able to do. But to be perfectly honest, I was doing backflips. 2 working days, who has that kind of demand? So it's been very, very frustrating. We're hanging in there because we have someone who is like a dog with a bone, thank heavens for that. But it's been very, very frustrating, And I'm glad to hear the town's gotten money. We haven't gotten a penny from FEMA, and so that's just some tidbits of our, as a local nonprofit experience.
What was your damage there?
Well, we had damage in the lower level of the building, and then when they came to assess that, they were very interested in helping us mitigate. So that's what we're working with FEMA about now. And again, it's sort of like whack-a-mole. You just never know what the next question will be, and what information you provided that all of a sudden doesn't count anymore. And anyway, so that's our experience.
And also want to make sure that, since you spoke to the nonprofit piece, individual experiences as homeowners as well that you've had trying to navigate this, or as small business owners with SBA, please feel free to jump into this part of the conversation. Yeah, Fran.
Small homeowner,
Yeah.
jumping in. My experience began on the day after the event. I finally was able to get home to find out that my entire foundation had been destroyed. The basement area flooded. It took a while to get the first inspection. I had 3, but it took 3 inspections to actually get them to recognize the foundation had failed. This is obviously, we're spending a lot of money doing that part. The small teams that came into town were great. I had 2 team leaders that I had to rely on, and I wouldn't have had my 3rd inspection without them. Okay, but they're frustrated. They can't get done what they want to do. FEMA for FEMA, not FEMA for everybody else. And that's what we're running into. I have over 700 pages in my file. I have appealed things so many times, and I still do not have the $41,000 that I could be allotted to repair my foundation and match it with a USDA grant for the $80,000 to $90,000 that it'll take to repair my home. I fight every day for this money. I have had people assisting me when they obfuscated information that would not allow me to go forward. Okay, and I can give you about 3 hours longer if you'd like, but I'm sure there's somebody else that'd like to talk today. The other issue that I'm having right now in my next meeting today is to go to Social Security because they're attacking me for taking the FEMA money because I'm low income. And there's a bill that you've got. Yes, absolutely. And there's a bill that you've got in Congress right now that will change this. Becca knows about it. She can tell you about it. Please get that passed so that people can have more than $2,000 in their bank account without losing benefits. Please. There you go.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Fran.
Yeah. So we
Yes.
thank you.
Way in the back.
Hi, Abby Sherman, Town of Killington. I actually also work for the Town of Bethel through Irene, so I went through that event.
Yeah.
And now I'm at Killington.
And standards. And so, tell me a little bit more about who was in the room as you saw this playing out, because obviously this is a huge problem.
From what I understand, they're having talks at the regional level with Vermont Emergency Management. They're trying to sort it out and understand our codes and standards that the towns have all adopted. We're just kind of sitting back waiting to hear what's the result of that. In the meantime, we're being told.
Everybody here is talking about cash flow and, you know, waiting for the money to come back from FEMA. During Irene, the state, and I see a lot of House and Senate people here, also allowed the towns to have a delay in paying the education tax at the time. We haven't seen that yet, so that was a positive with the state at that time. What Abby's hitting on is because of an Irene, during Irene, the state of Vermont decided like 15-inch culverts or 12-inch culverts weren't working to handle and wanted to move it so we could not have another one of these storms. We're gonna have the storm, but not have this devastation. And FEMA did come along, because Killington was July 7th, everybody else was about a week later. We had our storm on July 7th, and I walked with FEMA. Becca, you were up at Killington. Phil Scott was up at Killington and everything. And, you know, we want to build it so when this next storm comes in, we're not having the problem. But it just seems like government is big, so you have the state side that says, we need this, and this is the way you have to build it if you want to get bids and permits. And then you have FEMA saying, we're only gonna give you for what you have. And as Abby just said, now they're saying, you know, build it, and maybe we'll pay you. And the town of Killington, through Irene, they told us to do something. We just cleared our debt from Irene 3 years ago because of one project that was a $500,000 bridge that had to get put in, and the town had to borrow the $500,000. So while we have you two here from the feds, thank you very much, but also the folks that are here from the state side, if you can help a lot of these towns by helping out and delaying, because if you delay the tax payment to the state education, then that will help out people on the budget. So thank you for your time.
And I really appreciate that you mentioned, I see Kelly in the back, I see Wendy, I see Laura Sedalia, any other? Heather Chase. And Heather.
Thank you all.
Thank you for being here. I know that, you know, you all will all be taking this information to your contacts as well, because it is a federal state partnership that is going to help free up these log jams. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Chris Campbell, Winter Regional Commission. While there are issues with FEMA, I think really you need to look at the performance of FEMA Region 1 relative to the other FEMA regions. Because if you cast the net too big, you may not find where the actual problems lie. So you may want to talk to the other members of the New England delegations and look at how, especially on both the PA side and the IA side. And the other big challenge, I think, is on the individual assistance side. Individual assistance disasters, I think, are relatively new for Region 1 relative to the other regions. But we've got to better prepare for it. The FEMA model, as you know, is state, really actually kind of more local resolution of individuals and families who've been displaced and need to get back in their housing, supported by philanthropic means. But FEMA doesn't necessarily support like the planning for that even. And we've got to, this storm in July was my worst nightmare, just having lived in other places where you have a lot of people displaced. I'm afraid Vermont's going to lose 1,000 people or more as a result of this. Just not being able to find housing eventually. They'll hang on as long as they can, but we've really got to do more focus on the individual assistance side of things. As challenging as the public assistance side has been, The IA is still very new for Vermont, it's new for Maine, it's new for New Hampshire, it's new for all the New England states. And we've got to get on top of this because we just don't have the structures and all in place that say the southern, midwestern, and western states do. And as a result, we're going to keep seeing, I mean, I wish we wouldn't, but we're probably going to keep seeing the challenges and kind of inventing the wheel while we're driving as we get these big floods. And it could be wind events in the future or whatever, but just a suggestion.
Thanks, Chris.
And one of the things, Chris, while you were talking, that it reminded me of, and I hadn't said it earlier, that just a few weeks after we were dealing with our catastrophic flooding here in Vermont, one of my best buddies from Hawaii, Jill Takuda, was dealing with the horrific wildfires.
Right.
And yes, different catastrophe, really similar issues that were playing out on the ground. And so the two of us have, within the House, have been seeking out those other members from districts that, like Vermont, like Hawaii, have not necessarily been on the radar screen of climate emergencies yet. We're here now, and we need to figure out, again, the individual assistance piece. You're absolutely right. So, I'm going to go to someone who hasn't spoken yet, and then we'll come back around. The teacher in me is like, yes, yes.
Well, first of all, I'm Gail Mann. I'm an active resident, Londonderry Development Group. I want to talk about future a little bit, or should we continue to? Okay. So, we recently lost out on the Village Trust Initiative, which was a nice funding package. And one thing they mentioned in our kind of rejection letter was to really look at this program for how particularly to address flooding. And I don't know if you know the Mill Tavern down the road here, but that was a building we were going to kind of renovate. And we've heard from EPA, we've heard from many people that creating a floodplain there, instead of stopping the water, the dam is also a problem, by the way, but that rush of water is really what's impacting then the businesses.
Right.
And we have all these
That's
businesses for sale.
Right.
So I think, how can we begin to mitigate? What can we offer to Ed Brown that we could actually turn that into a beautiful park and floodplain? Things like that, I think, are the things that need to really be looked at, because it's just going to keep happening.
No, Chris, they just did something significant down in Brattleboro with that floodplain. And we've got this situation with dams like in Ludlow and I guess here, where they are contributing to that rush of water that aggravates the flood. So that's part of mitigation. There was a local vote, was it here or in Londonderry, about removing dams and it was defeated?
Here.
It was here, that's what I remember, yeah. So, folks here have to take a hard look at that as to what's in the best interest of the town. But dams can be your friend or they can be your adversary, and they've been our adversary in some cases. Yeah.
Could I just add to that a little bit?
Yeah.
So we have taken a bigger look at this, and we have started a group with Weston and Jamaica to look at regional flood control, because the West River is what floods us all.
Right.
So that is a project that's ongoing.
And you said that was with Weston and
Jamaica.
Well, see,
We're looking at multiple floodplain restoration and elevation projects.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And again, the local leadership on that is really essential, because number one, is making decisions about where you can address structural problems. Number two, it takes community buy-in. Some of those dams have a swimming hole, and that means a lot to people. And these things can't happen without local leadership where you're addressing the concerns that the people you represent have. But I think that's part of why having more local authority makes a lot of sense.
And we'll go to you in just a second. Tying it back to what others have said, it makes no sense to rebuild what you had before that failed. And so there should not be an incentive for you to do that. The incentive should be for you to build it better so that you can mitigate that damage in the future. So, I just want to make that obvious. And that is something that I know we're talking about in the House. I know it's something that the Senator is working on as well. The policies and procedures at FEMA need to make sense for resiliency. So,
by the way, You know, on this resiliency, in Irene, we've got the Killington manager here, who's involved. But the rule at FEMA then was if you had an 18-inch culvert, the only thing they'd pay for was an 18-inch culvert, even when you needed a 30-inch culvert. And Vermont led the way in saying, wait a minute, this makes no sense. We've got to, it's not just about resiliency and trying to get something for nothing. It's like to survive the next event. And in fact, a lot of the measures that were taken after Irene mitigated the damage that we had last year. Bad as it was, it would have been an awful lot worse if we didn't incorporate resilience into the equation.
Well, I was just going to say what you said, which is, sorry, my name is Susan Collins and I run the community fund for Londonderry. And yeah, is there any way to find funding to forward plan, like Tom is doing, which maybe doesn't, I don't know how much money is going to be needed for projects, for those sort of projects, but yeah, who knows. But yeah, trying to find some money for that, not just to patch and repair previous damage.
I just wanted to highlight the impact of PTSD. We don't, it's not spoken about, and I'm not sure what the solution is, but I think of the US military, I think of the VA system, and this is a real phenomena. I knew that the week after the storm, there was another rainstorm, and the prickles on my back were an indication to me that this meant I'd been affected. And I think somewhere we need to recognize the impact of PTSD on our communities. I don't know how and in whatever way to do it, but it's important.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I actually introduced the bill a couple months ago about this particular issue because we know that there is ongoing trauma. It is the Mental Health Emergency Needs and Disasters Act. I don't need to give you all of the issues, but I'm looking at mental health needs after disaster, not just short term, but over the long term, having people embedded in those communities to help with that, and also looking at the issue of substance abuse and how it goes up in, after a disaster. It makes sense. People are looking for relief. So mental health is one of the issues that I ran on, and something that's incredibly important to me, and it ties in directly to this issue. And so I'd love to talk to you further about ideas you might have.
Yeah, Jim Linville, Vice Chair of the Weston Select Board and Chair of the Weston Flood Recovery Committee. I don't have a new message, but I can't emphasize enough the need for navigators. The next time a flood happens, it would be really earth-shaking if we could have someone who was competent assigned to our town, paid for by FEMA or I don't care who, because, and Tom, I can see you nodding your head, if I spent 20 minutes reading the 30-page email, of which I get 50 a day from agencies trying to help me, I wouldn't be able to sleep at all. And and sleeping is one of my favorite things, but this is I think the way to address the need of small towns who don't have town managers, who don't have, the select boards are virtually volunteer, and I can tell you my skill set is as unsuited for select board work as you can possibly imagine, and to throw us into this stuff with and then try to fix the problem by overwhelming us with information, that's not useful.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Brown, also from the Flood Resiliency Committee in Weston and the Planning Commission. Taking off on the navigator, it's not just during the event, but it's years later, because as we're starting to, so for example, we have as most people know, a playhouse is non-operational, and it's affecting the town in a major way. It's affecting the theater company. It has long-term ramifications, including the potential demise of the theater program in Weston, which is, I think, a key component for us. So it's navigating us into the future with the focus of resiliency. And to that point, I'll use an example. So we learned late about the congressional earmarks, and to you at this point, because I know that both your fellow senator and your office put these forward to the towns. And we scrambled. We got a group of volunteers together to do a series of the earmarks, and all were rejected, and I'm to say this, by your office at this point in time. Not quite sure we understand fully what now as we go backwards, thinking, wasn't this mainly about flood resiliency? And all of ours were rejected on that, not for that basis, but were rejected. So I'm supporting Jim and everyone else who's talked about this. It's professional help to the towns, not just during the event, ongoing, because we have to move quickly from recovery to resiliency.
Right.
And resiliency is the way of the future, because it's going to happen again probably this year. We hate to say it, but it will. And I just think it's important for people to help us, especially when something like a congressional earmark comes up. What's it about? Do we spend our time doing it, or do we not?
Well, let me answer that. First of all, you have to have the professional help, okay? And the best example is what you did here in Ludlow. When you got a person who was, pardon me, Londonderry, you got a person who had experience and could be, quote, a navigator. You just knew which of those 30-page emails to read and which to hit delete, right? So the point that we've heard from all of you is you need professional, experienced assistance, okay? Number two, the earmark process is a one-off, and in fact, I think we need a structural response. So whether you're successful in getting your earmark or not, and there's all kinds of rules and regulations. It's not just whether our office thinks it's worthy. Does it fit into the rules of the various committees, and it gives you a headache, okay? So my point here is that we have to have a structural approach so that the affected towns have the capacity to do what you managed to do here in Londonderry. And a lot of towns can't afford to pay for that. And the complaints that we've heard, the observations, is that you don't get consistent answers from the various people at FEMA, and you don't get consistent interactions with the same person, and it just doesn't work. I mean, you know, that doesn't work. And this is where I do believe there's some structural issues that we have to take up about the aftermath of the immediate event, and then how, when it's coming to a long-term situation where you're dealing with large towns and cities, but also very small municipalities or towns like we have here in Vermont, what's the practical way to do this? And the beginning point has to be access to somebody who is experienced in dealing with the bureaucracy.
Let's do two more questions. We'll do brief.
Oh, is that really?
Remarks. We're coming to the
Oh,
end.
you gotta be kidding me. All right. Yeah.
I'm Chris Morrow on the Weston Select Board and running to replace Kelly in the State House. I just want to say that it's not too late for this flood. I know I was on the phone with HUD last week, and there's another federal agency that's also getting a tranche of money.
Yes.
HUD is supposed to get
That's
90
right.
to $100 million. And, you know, so it's not too late to help us get money for recovery for this flood. So just try to
Absolutely.
keep that in mind. We're not like looking at the next 1 in 5 years. You know, there's still an opportunity to build resilience into our recovery over the next year, 2 or 3. And the HUD guy was very honest. He's like, basically you need to hire a consultant to go through this process to fill out the application.
Right.
You know, it's so complicated and so time consuming. It's like, well, we might do that, it might be worth it if you get it, you know, but it's just silly, you know?
You know, and Chris, the best program is the disaster relief funding through the community development block grant. The reason it's the best is that it provides the most flexibility. And it gives the local leadership the most authority to say, we gotta fix this bridge and how, and do it now, and then get on. The president has a supplemental appropriation that he's just submitted that has additional money for disaster relief. And Becca was mentioning Hawaii, and in the Senate, Senator Schatz from Hawaii is the chair of the subcommittee, and he's totally committed to this. So we'll continue to work on it. No promises, you know, we work in Congress, so you know what our story is, all right? But that makes a lot of sense what you're saying, Chris.
And I'm glad you mentioned it. It was actually on my list to say at the end, but you beat me to it. So we had the acting HUD secretary in Vermont just a couple weeks ago. We hosted her. I actually was able to have a face-to-face conversation with her directly about this issue of this money that's coming through. And so it is more flexible. And so one of the notes that I just made to myself now is, how do we in this moment help towns to have the resources that they need to actually take advantage of this next tranche of funds? So that is what our teams will be looking at. So I'm glad you brought it in. Yeah. Do we say one more?
One more.
Okay. I think we're gonna go, Wendy, I think we're gonna go with somebody who is not in the legislature. No offense. Yeah.
It could be the last question, but I'll speak. Kristen Nelson here in Londonderry, a business owner. So as a person starting a business outside of the special flood hazard zone, just to put a point on the resiliency piece, like we know we need to have, bioretention swales and an underground stormwater system, and are hoping that there might be funding to support some of that going forward.
Okay, thank you.
So you?
Yeah, we'll turn over to you in just a moment, but before we do, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the people who allowed this to happen, which include Max and the team at the Grill for hosting us, as well as Martha and Joel from Electric Mayhem next door. Thank you all so much. This wouldn't be happening without you. And a quick casework plug, if you have any additional issues, please don't hesitate to call either of our offices. We have staff there to help you out. Just Google Representative Balint, Senator Welch, it'll come right up. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll turn it over to you.
And that our staff are the ones who make it all happen. And we have terrific, you talked about professional people with skills who can get work done. We are very lucky to have really great staff members here in Vermont and also in DC. And so I want to just say thank you for the time that you've given us. This enables us to do our jobs better. And I know you're all very busy people with your lives and your businesses and your organizations, so thank you for taking the time. That's the first thing. I also just want to name the elephant in the room, just so that you know. We all know that people are worried about the Supreme Court issues. Everybody is worried about the election. The entire country is racked with general anxiety right now. What I want you to know is the way that I'm thinking about this moment is the work is the same for me and for the senator and for our offices. The work is the same regardless of who's at the top of the ticket, regardless of who's in the Supreme Court. Our job every single day is to show up for Vermonters and do the very best job that we can with our colleagues to make sure government is working for you. That does not change. So that's what I'm focused on with every fiber of my being every single day. So wanted to say that.
Becca, thanks so much for organizing this and the great job your staff did. And as Becca mentioned early on, there's 3 of us down there in DC. So we figured out what Vermonters have long known: working together makes us more effective. Okay. Washington, there seems to be a preoccupation with conflict. We believe there's a premium on cooperation. And what's inspiring to me is the Vermont approach is by collaborating, working together. We can get things done. It's never going to be easy, but what you're entitled to is to know that if you do your work, you're going to be half a step forward, not 2 steps back. And that's why we have to get these reforms in the FEMA process and have much more authority pushed down to the local level, so that you who are accountable to your local voters but aware of the local situation have more tools and resources to be able to get the job done. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much.
What are your main takeaways from this conversation that you heard today?
Main takeaways are local organizations, local municipalities, and individuals in Vermont have been working so hard and doing whatever they can at the local level to build back from the flooding. I've also heard really strongly that FEMA is not working well for small towns. We're not able to do the paperwork in the time that is allotted because we don't have the navigators that we need at the federal level to help towns and villages and smaller municipalities navigate this system. So Senator Welch and I, we have a whole long punch list we wrote down of things that we've got to focus on, because if the money is there but it's not able to be disseminated out to the people who most need it, then the system's not working.
Your main takeaway from the conversation you heard today, the questions from the folks, anything stand out?
We've got to give more authority to local officials to do the work that can only be done locally. They need help in navigating the bureaucracy, but I think we have to have a FEMA reorganization that has as its goal to push responsibility to the local leaders along with resources to get the job done. It'll be more efficient and done more quickly.
Peter Welch and Becca Balint left Londonderry for a similar visit to Ludlow, up Route 100, where they were holding a similar gathering. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.